Okay, so I'm going to start with an example just to say a little bit about this data set. We had over 50 interviews at a number of data points, so longitudinal interview data. So it was a big data set. And what we were interested in was an analysis of identity, and particularly maths identity. The project was larger, but the interviews were particularly coming in around mathematical learner identity. And we were doing an analysis which, from our conceptual framework and theoretical framework, was highlighting cultural models of mathematics and discourses of mathematics. Excuse me. So it was these cultural models of mathematics that we wanted to identify. So beliefs about mathematics, for instance, as being right and wrong answers, or more elitist view of maths, different beliefs. So in order to do the analysis, we really need to think, well, what was it the cultural models meant within this project? So cultural models there again can be defined in many ways, but we were using an approach by James G. Everyday theories which are situated in social and cultural experiences and which inform actions or behaviours. So beliefs that influence behaviours, choices, aspirations, decisions, perhaps whether to go on and take maths further or to take a mathematically demanding degree, which was the focus of this study. But they're talked about in different ways as distributed threads, cultural. James G talks about discourse with a big D. But what I'm getting at here is there's different ways that we might be approaching the analysis through a conceptual and a theoretical framework. Okay, so when we're faced with the data, we have different approaches we can take. So we were looking at identity, and fundamental really to the project was the idea that we build our identities in practice and discursively using cultural models. And so we were interested in what cultural models are there of ways of being a mathematician or a learner of mathematics, and how can mathematics learner identity be mediated by mathematics classroom social practice? Yeah. Can we expand the repertoire of cultural models, more inclusive ways of viewing maths and being a maths learner? So that's what the project was really aiming at. So it's important because we had this conceptual theoretical framework that we were able to demonstrate theoretical sensitivity. And there were different examples here. So we had concepts of self-identity, how we identify ourselves, identity in practice, professional identity, institutional identity. Again, this was quite heavily influenced by the work of James G. So different cultural models there of maths and how they're used in the discourse. So positioning was important. So are the participants talking about maths as having right or wrong answers? Is that a good thing for them? Are they favourable towards that view? Is that helping them to enjoy maths or not? So is it positioning towards, away from? And we also included the neutral category, because not all of our participants talked in a positive or negative way when they were using cultural models and drawing on cultural models within their interviews. And we also developed concepts and temporal codes. So, for instance, it was important that we knew when they were talking about learning maths and in what context of school, context of everyday life. So we developed quite a intricate framework in the end. But the point being here that if we are developing a conceptual framework that isn't wholly emergent, wholly grounded, that we need to make decisions, and these decisions are not ones that you make within NVivo itself and would be made with your supervisors or within project teams. So as well as having a conceptual framework and those ideas, we're still very much going through an emergent coding approach. So we'd start off with NVivo coding. That's using the exact expressions used by participants as codes. And also in vitro coding, so that's using our codes that we developed as a research team, our code book. So, and what we mean by emergent coding, staying close to the data, we might highlight that data, and then we have a term that's descriptive of that code, of that text. So we're developing many codes. So that's early on in the project. We're developing many codes. So that's not using our data, but you get the idea. We're staying close to the data and reading that. And whether you would want to do that stage actually in NVivo or on paper, I think that's a choice that you'd need to make individually or as a team. So then you need decisions about what is your approach to analysis. Now, we might have used Braun and Clark's thematic analysis. We didn't choose to do that. It was a very popular approach and certainly suitable when you've got a large number of data points and interviews as we had. We tended to use an approach really that we're trying to summarize the data using codes. Links very much with Flick's approach to coding, but also to the codes that you would have found in the concept and coding chapter by Hammersley and Atkinson. That's quite an old paper now, but still worth reading. So you have that available to you. Okay, so we have a little bit of text here. I love maths in primary school. I've always liked that. It's the right and wrong answer, and I wanted to get it right. Okay, so that would be coded using our conceptual framework as time passed, because they're talking back at primary school. Primary school also gives the context. Maths is black and white, right or wrong, cultural model. So it's coded in that way, and the positioning is positive because they're explicitly saying that they liked that there were right and wrong answers. Okay, so that would be how we coded that particular text. And what we have there are then multiple codes for the utterance. In this case, that might have been a whole answer or part of an answer. So we chose to use different lengths, not always a sentence, not always a line or a whole response, which would be called the utterance. So variable length of for the unit of analysis. And what this did allow us to do then is to use Boolean operators to look for combinations of codes and pull that up from the data. That was very useful. So we're getting to a point now where it's about choosing the approach to analysis. You might be taking grounded theory approach, so Glaser and Strauss, for instance, or Corbin and Strauss, or you may be a different approach. You could be using narrative analysis and discourse analysis, etc. So those decisions need to be made outside of NVivo package, okay, because you're the analysts. How we worked in this particular project was, first of all, close and multiple readings of transcripts, some transcripts. There were a lot of transcripts there, so we worked with some. And we started with a small number of interviews with individuals and coding in vivo, actually mostly on paper at this point. And we were working in a research team, and we had group meetings, and that helped us to develop initial coding structure. And we had several meetings where we would all look at the same transcript and we discussed those transcripts, and that helped us then to see, well, is that coding transcript structure working or not? Do we need to develop it? And but the trend, we were staying close to the data to bring in concepts from our thinking toolbox. So that was common to the team, social cultural approach. And we were well read in certain texts, I guess would be fair to say, and particularly regarding beliefs and identity. So that helped us then to move from more emergent and theoretical to theoretical and axial coding. Okay, and it was really after the initial coding structure that we started to use NVivo. In fact, I think in this project itself we were using Atlas at that time, but we did later in our work move on to NVivo. But we worked hard on understanding that common framework of understanding what does a code mean. So in NVivo you get the chance to define a code, and that's really important, and especially if you're working with other people in the team. But we only started using NVivo after we had an initial framework agreed. And even then, that framework needed some development, which wasn't surprising because we had a lot of interviews. But even with a small data set, we'd expect that time, and that's where the intellectual work is happening, not necessarily happening in NVivo. So you need a reason to know why it's important to use NVivo or why you should use NVivo. And I'm not necessarily saying that that is the choice that you would want to make. Personally, I believe there's a lot of advantages in doing so. But there are some disadvantages, certainly at the beginning, in terms of setting up the codes, developing the coding framework, and entering those codes into NVivo. It can be very time consuming. I think you reap the rewards later when we get to the searching and analysis part. End of video.